Welcome to Resilience in the Round, a brand new podcast from the UK Resilience Academy. This show is all about bringing people together as part of a wider national resilience conversation. Over 6 30-minute episodes, we will be welcoming a range of guests into the round to talk about the structures they work in, share some of their stories, and discuss solutions for strengthening societal resilience together. Welcome to Resilience in the Round, a brand new podcast from the UK Resilience Academy. On this show, we're talking about resilient systems, we're sharing stories and discussing solutions for strengthening societal resilience together. Today, we're specifically talking about professionalising resilience, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Elle Parker into the round, friend, colleague, academic extraordinaire.
Let's not
great to have you.
Hi, Leanna. Thanks so much for the invite. I'm really excited to talk to you today about professionalising resilience.
Great to have you. Now, most people I talk to will always describe their route into resilience as quite diverse and eclectic. But we're interested in our first question here to get to know you. So my question is, what's your story? How did you get into resilience, and what does your current role now entail?
Well, I think I won't be any different to some of the other people that you've spoken to. My original interest was, as my other half calls it, in rocks. So my degree was in geology, my master's was in engineering geology, and then my PhD was in climate change, which was largely based on ocean cores and sediment. So I went from rocks to researching about mud. I think the thing that kind of pulled me into the resilience world was that a last component of my climate change research was about how to communicate the potential rapidity of climate variations to policymakers. And I'd never really thought about the human element. Those people that live and breathe socio-economic and political issues, the humanities people, they find it really hard to comprehend that physical scientists and engineers that really genuinely can just be interested in physical process, the technical properties of materials. And I make no excuse for that. I think very rarely would people choose to learn about, the physical properties of the Southeast Asian monsoon system. Do you know what I mean? So it's I like it as a background to come from. It gives me big perspectives on time, 4.6 billion years of geological history.
It's a while.
It is a while, yeah. And it also helps me think about systems and complexity and interactions between oceans and atmosphere and currents over, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. So the idea of then taking that and thinking about the feedback mechanisms and the complexity in terms of resilience, societal resilience, but also in terms of the interaction between agencies, organisations, communities, before, during and after emergencies has all just been a kind of logical progression for me, I think. I can see those sorts of connections.
That's fascinating. Thanks so much for that information. Really interesting route into resilience. And what's the connection then between the rocks and the Resilience Academy? How did you come to work for UKRA? What's your role title and what do you do?
Okay, so my journey, I suppose, to the UKRA was I was a long time course director, curriculum developer in higher education, undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in emergency and disaster management. Later I had the opportunity, and I'm sure we'll come back and talk about this in a bit, but later I had the opportunity when I left higher education to develop the Resilience and Emergencies professional apprenticeship standard, which kind of really got me thinking about that link between learning and development needs and our profession. And that then presented a load of connections and demonstrated a very clear need in the sector to start really thinking about professional pathways and professionalising resilience, learning and development and opportunities. And the best way to do that was through working in partnership with Cabinet Office and in the UK Resilience Academy.
Brilliant. So you're now a resilience capability lead at the Academy, and you have a particular remit for your role, is that right?
Yeah, so there's several resilience capability leads, but my particular area of focus is what we've notionally called curriculum architect. So this idea that not everybody needs the same learning and development opportunities. That varies depending on the role that they have. It depends on their entry point, their level of experience, and that there's such a potpourri of provision across resilience and emergencies that actually I think it's really hard to navigate. Like when you want to train to be a medical practitioner, there's a very clear route. When you want to train to be an engineer, there's a very clear route. There's a very clear set of requirements, both for the kind of entry point qualification, but then the requirements for your development and your continuing chartership or recognition. And I think because that doesn't exist in resilience and there's all of these bits and bobs, it's just really hard for people to navigate. So we were keen to bring some structure and transparency to that, I think.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and actually leads really nicely just into the second question, really, which was trying to get some context for this topic of professionalising resilience. And you mentioned there the development of the Resilience and Emergencies professional apprenticeship. And it seems to me that was quite a milestone in the pivot from working at, in academia at large through to what we're doing at the Resilience Academy. Can you explain what we mean by resilience professionalisation and how the partnership came about?
Okay, so a long time ago, I'd had a conversation with Cabinet Office about the fact that there were these modern apprenticeships, and this struck me as a wonderful opportunity for the sector to grow their own. Whether I agree with it or not, some of the feedback that we used to get from employers was that a traditional academic degree doesn't necessarily set graduates up for the workplace.
Sure.
So I took it upon myself to embed things like employability modules, placement modules into our degrees in order to boost the workplace readiness of our graduates. So that's always been very close to my heart. I think as a result of that and the initial conversations, and also, spookily, my best friend happened to work for Skills England and was also working on the development of the apprenticeship schemes across the UK. So these things rub off on you, don't they? But it was actually the team in West Mercia, LRF, who drew down some MHCLG Innovation Fund money.
Okay, and that's Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government.
That is the one. I'm glad you got all those words in the right order. I find it a challenge. So yes, there was money available for innovative, relatively small projects that local resilience partnerships could get the money and invest in something that they saw as a need. So West Mercia got this money. I was invited to apply to be the sort of project manager for this and drive forward the development of an apprenticeship in resilience and emergencies.
Great.
And that set an occupational standard for professionals. And we were it's a process that is a consultative process. We had a trailblazer group of core employers So it's not designed or defined by externally. It's the sector has defined the standard for the Resilience and Emergencies professional. And we consulted with, I think, by the end of it, over 100 different organisations on the individual skills, knowledge and behaviour statements for the Resilience and Emergencies professional apprenticeship standard. So there's now this opportunity for employers to draw down government funding. It currently stands at £23,000, so that they can enrol one of their employees onto the Resilience and Emergencies apprenticeship. They then do their component of training and study at one of the academic institutions that are delivering the training. It takes 3 years normally, but you can have a direct entry, you can have recognition for prior learning, but the standard is a 3-year degree, but it's on the job. And a lot of the learning that you do is applied to what you're doing in your everyday business. So you kind of grow together. You and your apprentice as the employer can mould somebody to be the kind of emergency planner or resilient professional that you need.
Great. So you'd been working on the Resilience and Emergencies professional apprenticeship, looking at how to develop some occupational standards within that work with central government engagement and support. And then you found actually Cabinet Office were also wanting to engage in professionalising pathways for resilience role holders more generally.
Yep.
They're looking at defining roles and routes into resilience. Can you tell me a little bit more about that work and how that led on to what are now the National Occupational Standards for Resilience and Emergencies?
Sure. So I refer to this as phase one. I'm not quite sure how many phases there are going to be, but phase one was a really exciting opportunity to work with the Cabinet Office UKRA policy team in order to do the sort of groundwork to find out what was needed in the profession more widely. So if you think about, we've kind of set a bar in the middle. You might think of a resilience and emergencies professional as being someone who is a senior officer. So you do your degree. You might expect someone to have a degree to be a graduate as they move from being an emergency planning officer into being a senior emergency planning officer, plus some experience, having been exposed to a range of different experiences to embed that knowledge that they've developed during their degree. But what about those who are in a more senior role? What about those who are in aligned roles? What about those who are career changers? I mean, we have loads of career changers who move into resilience in emergencies. So we were actually dealing with quite a small part of the sector when we were thinking about our resilience and emergencies degree. So the phase one work allowed me to engage with resilience and emergencies professionals across the 4 nations, across government, across resilience partnerships. I talked to so many people in a workshop context, which meant that they kind of pinged off each other. And it was a really lovely combination of catharsis. Where did you come from? Oh, did you? Well, I'm an engineer. Oh, well, I worked in communications. And then we heard so many lovely stories, but as well, it fed us just this wonderful picture of rich insight and information that allowed me to illustrate diagrams, spreadsheets, flow diagrams about all the different entry routes into the profession, the aligned professionals that people worked with. It meant that we could identify much more clearly the different types of roles in resilience and emergencies. Because one of the things that we realised was we didn't really know who we were as a profession. If we were going to be a profession, where was the edge of our profession? So a lot of that came out of that initial phase one.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point about that having a almost an edge for the profession, because when we talk about resilience professionals, my mind immediately would be sort of police, fire, ambulance, our emergency services, which of course under the Civil Contingencies Act are our Category 1 responders, but they're not our only Category 1 responders. We've also got wider NHS, we've got local authorities, local councils. We've actually got far more people working in resilience than I think many people would realise. And especially now after COVID, increasingly more people's roles have a resilience aspect to it. So when we talk about the resilience profession, how would you even define that? Has it been attempted, or have you got a sort of a nice, neat nutshell that you can put it into, or is how I've described it probably as good as we're going to get?
So as part of the project, we ended up defining the resilience and emergencies profession. So there is a statement about that. But for me, I would say resilience is, or the resilience and emergencies professional is as much about how they work as opposed to what they do. So emergency services and emergency responders are resilience professionals if they support that wider cycle of understanding risks, preventing risks, preparing for risks, developing the capabilities to be able to respond as and when those emergencies and incidents happen, whether that's within their organisation, whether it's externally, whether it's in communities, whatever that is, and then can support recovery that actually ensures that the risks at the end of that unfortunate process are less than they were when they started. So for me, you're a resilience professional if you're constantly working around that iterative process of risk reduction and capability development. And that capability development can be your capabilities to understand risk, your abilities to be able to reduce risk, and your abilities to be able to respond when the bad things happen.
Yeah.
And obviously following that, your abilities and capabilities to be able to recover. So for me, that's what we tried to articulate. That's what came through very, very clearly in our consultation about, so what is it that a resilience and emergencies professional does that makes them a distinct profession?
Sure. No, that's really, really helpful. And we'll go in just a moment on to talk a little bit more about the National Occupational Standards that you've been involved with refreshing as well. But just before we do, I'm aware we've talked about competencies and then capabilities.
Yes.
And I think it's important to make a distinction, because the two can in some contexts seem quite similar, but in fact they're not at all. And especially when we're talking in the context of the resilience profession. Would you be able to just help us out and clarify, how would you make distinct a competency that a person develops with a resilience capability that they might deliver?
Okay, so this is super interesting. I am a word person. Words really matter. How we
Absolutely.
don't they?
Yeah.
Like how we define and use the language in our profession is really, really important. So I'm really glad you picked me up on that. So a competence is a descriptor of the skills, knowledge and behaviours. So your cognitive abilities, your psychomotor abilities and your behavioural attributes to be able to do the thing that you need to do. So the task normally that you need to be able to do. Now, that means that competence is then a component of the resilience capability.
Right.
So you can have all the equipment, you can have the plans, you can have the arrangements, you can have the facilities, you can have the venue, but if you don't have a competent human in the middle of it, then your resources are not capable of being deployed. Does that work?
Yeah, that's really helpful and really clear. Thanks, Al. Word person too, all the way. So really appreciate that. Coming back then to those national occupational standards, what is a national occupational standard precisely? Who's involved? How did you go about it? And where are they now? Because they've been launched actually at the same time as the UK Resilience Academy itself back in April.
Yeah.
But we haven't really spoken much about them in a way. So tell us more.
A national occupational standard describes the overall set of functions that a professional needs to do in order to deliver that occupational area.
Okay.
So it's really important to understand that all the different role holders in resilience and emergencies may have responsibility to deliver only some of those occupational areas.
Sure. Okay.
So employers or somebody else on their behalf, maybe Cabinet Office and the Resilience Academy, maybe your professional body, maybe a strategic sector representative like the NHS England, for example, have a responsibility to define what those role holders need to know underneath those occupational standards.
Okay.
So that's where we take those top level occupational descriptors and allocate them to particular roles. And the minute we do that, we have a role competency descriptor. Right. So, for example, if you're a strategic incident manager, your competencies would be made up and aligned mostly to the National Occupational Standard in response.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're an emergency planner, then you might have proportionately less competent statements that align to the response. Or indeed, you might have more competent statements in total because you'll be working across the community preparedness ones, you'll be working across the risk ones, you'll be working across the writing plans and exercising ones. So we need to take these Lego bricks of occupational standard statements and put them in the right boxes, build the right Lego houses for each role holder to go and live in.
Yeah, no, that makes very good sense. And we've had national occupational standards for a while. They're not new, but there is something about our resilience and emergencies national occupational standards which is new. Why is that? Why did they need to be updated, and how did that work?
Historically, we've had the National Occupational Standards for civil contingencies.
Right.
And they were defined through a very thorough consultative process. But things have moved on quite a lot.
Sure.
It was funny, as I was reviewing them, it was interesting to note that some of the words that we use all the time now were barely mentioned in those old occupational standards. For example, resilient. like it wasn't there. We didn't use terms like capabilities. We didn't articulate some of the detail in the processes and the tasks and the functions that are kind of everyday bread and butter to us in the sector now. So they needed a bit of a yanking up and a bit of an update and a bit of a refresh. So the process for that was they are owned. The National Occupational Standards are owned by Skills for Justice,
right.
And it's their arm, the Workforce Development Trust, that worked with us to support the review process. They have a very clear, auditable process through which national occupational standards are reviewed, revised and updated. So first of all, they went out for survey, and we had hundreds of responses. So public consultation, survey against each of the National Occupational Standards, what's good about it, what needs improving, what's missing. So we had a huge amount of data from that. And then on the basis of that, I reviewed the old National Occupational Standards, and we pulled together an expert working group. And the expert working panel, they were key representatives from, again, across the 4 nations and local resilience partnerships. And we also went a long way to make sure that we had Category 2 responders in there. One of the biggest and loudest voices that we heard was the old civil contingencies, National Occupational Standards, were too exclusive. They were very much blue light and local resilience partnership focused. There was too much jargon in there that was very much civil contingencies. And yet now we know that resilience is a whole of society endeavour, and we wanted them to be much more inclusive. So the expert working group was made up of representatives across not just local resilience partnerships, but 4 nations government, but also we were very keen to pull in the utilities, other Category 2 organisations from transport, to make sure that the language was inclusive. You know, we had some brilliant feedback from voluntary and community sector organisations, just to make sure that if you were a resilience professional working in any sector, these were meaningful to you.
That's great. So we've got the refreshed National Occupational Standards. You've noticed that the language had changed, and in fact, the landscape has changed as well in terms of the risks, hazards, the threats that we face. They were launched at the same time as the UK Resilience Academy. How has that been significant for the Academy and for the professionalisation of resilience?
The way in which training providers and employers can use the National Occupational Standards and the role competencies that can sit beneath that is you can use it for recruitment, you can use it for performance management, but perhaps most importantly, you can use it for the design and development of learning and development materials. Since the launch in April, we've been working to refresh and clarify the sort of pathway provision now. I think one of the important things that we perhaps don't acknowledge with with any kind of competence-based training is it takes time to become competent. And so when we talk about pathways, it's about that learning journey. So when you start and you come to something new, your proficiency level that you might expect to get to is an awareness level.
Okay.
Then you go away and you take your awareness level bits of knowledge and you start embedding it. And then you think, okay, I'm kind of getting this now. You know, you've read the chapter in the textbook, that kind of thing. And you think, right, okay, feeling a bit more confident now, I want to have a go. So now I'm going to do some workshops, I'm going to do some exercise, I'm going to apply it in my workplace. You get to a working level of knowledge. You might need some mentoring, you might need some support, but you're getting there. You know the basics, and you can do the working level activities and tasks within your occupational area. Then you need to embed it further. You need the experiential learning that you gather over time. And that's really hard for any face-to-face, training provider to give you. They can give you the knowledge and they can give you an opportunity to have a practice, but to get a level of mastery, you've got to have the time and the opportunity to be able to go away and do it. And it's once you've had that period of time that you can come back and have, whether it's a formal or an informal assessment of your competence. So we're looking at thinking about learning and development in resilience the same way as you would think about anything else. It takes time and it requires opportunity for embedding. And so you'll notice over the next few months, years, as the UK Resilience Academy embeds its learning and development provision, you'll see that there are awareness level courses, working level courses, practitioner level opportunities, masterclasses, and expert level workshops.
That's really well explained. Thank you. And actually, we're coming towards the end of our time together now. And as I bring the round to a close, I'm always keen to understand our guests' top 3 takeaways. So for those, whether they be considering entering the resilience profession, already working at one of those levels that you've discussed within the resilience profession, or wanting to develop further, what would your key takeaways be for them?
If you're an employer and you're bringing in and bringing on new people into your team, please think about the Resilience and Emergencies professional apprenticeship. I think it's potentially going to bring in a whole new different route into the profession that we need. I would also say, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it very much, but I think everybody should be encouraged to think about their continuing professional development.
Yeah.
So the kind of things that the UKRA offers falls directly into that bag of continuing professional development. Be eager to learn, stay on top of your profession. I know we're all up against it in terms of time, but so important to give yourself those learning and networking opportunities. And I think my third point would be the value of the National Occupational Standards and the competence descriptors that sit beneath them for doing something like a training needs analysis in your organisation. That it allows you to find out where the knowledge and skill gaps are for your role holders, and therefore it allows you to then provide the targeted learning and development opportunities that they need. Helps you think about planning training budgets, think about what capabilities you're going to test during your exercises. Those National Occupational Standards now give you some really clear descriptors of what your people need to be able to do.
So for employers, we're thinking about the Resilience and Emergencies professional apprenticeship. For individuals, we're thinking about how we can keep our own lifelong learning journey going and continue to develop as professionals. And then actually back again in the hands of organisations more widely, consider how the refreshed National Occupational Standards for Resilience and Emergencies can be used to evaluate your training needs in-house. Really good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me in the round today, Elle. It's been a pleasure to have you, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Lovely. Thanks so much for your time, Leanne.
This podcast was brought to you by the United Kingdom Resilience Academy, UKRA. The UKRA launched on the 28th of April 2025 to help deliver a better prepared and resilient society. For more information on how we are enhancing the resilience and training education offer, strengthening professionalisation, and convening collaborative conversations, visit ukresilienceacademy.org.